Tatum the drive. Tatum the finish. It is banner 18. The mission commanded is mission accomplished.
What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of You Got Boston. Beginning of the slow days of the Celtics offseason, but I haven't been on here in a while, so I wanted to get on and answer all your Celtics questions, discuss some of the offseason rumors that we've heard, because there are some names floating around, and I think the biggest one is probably Ben Simmons. And then discuss some of the latest news items. I'm sure some of you have seen Derrick White launched a podcast Monday, 2 days ago. I interviewed his best friend and his podcast co-host yesterday, and that was an interesting conversation. I'll share a little bit more about that. And then also wanted to talk a little bit about what we do know as far as signings go. I reported earlier today Max Shulga signs a two-way contract. Amari Williams, the Celtics' other second-round draft pick, has yet to do so. I would expect him to, so I think it's just a matter of one happening before the other. And then we'll talk a little bit about where I project the team to be next season. But honestly, I have no idea. It is really, really hard to project where this team is going to be. So we'll see. But I'm pretty conflicted. I can see I have a broad range where this team could go. So as always, feel free to put your questions in the chat box as we go here. I'm going to be going live once a week during the offseason. We're not going to have a ton going on in August and September on the news front, most likely. I mean, you never know. Sometimes you get those random August or September trades, but for the most part, I think the roster that we have right now is pretty similar to the roster that we're going to have, the first day of training camp. Are there going to be in-season trades? I would guess more likely than not, but we'll see. So at the top, I'll just talk a little bit about the offseason rumors. I know Ben Simmons has been a big headliner. I know that the betting odds suggest right now that the Celtics are the front runner, or they did at least at one point. I don't check those, but I always see them aggregated. So apologies if it's no longer current. But there's been a lot of buzz, momentum around Ben Simmons as the Celtics, potentially pursuing him. I don't think it's a made up thing. I understand where that came from. I would be surprised if Ben Simmons was on the Celtics next season. So count me in the camp that's pretty skeptical about the fit and about it actually kind of playing out. Obviously, he has a long injury history. That's something that you take into consideration with him. There's just a lot surrounding him as a player. So I am leaning against Ben Simmons signing with the team. We'll see what happens, but I think it's a little bit more smoke than substance at this point. And then besides for that, Anthony Simons, Georges Niang, when they first got traded to Boston, I expected them to be reshuffled in another move shortly after. And at this point in the summer, I think it's safe to assume that those guys will be on the roster next season. It's not certain. Certainly, if you get a good trade, I think that they're still open to making moves. But we're heading into the part of the offseason where I am going to start kind of thinking a little bit about okay, could this guy fit on the roster next year, and what does this player bring? So we'll see about those two guys in particular. They both have numbers. They haven't been officially introduced to us in a press conference or anything like that. The only guys that have been introduced are Luka Garza and Josh Minot, and that was really informally during halftime of a summer league game. So there hasn't been a big press conference. That being said, Kevin Durant hasn't had a press conference in Houston, so it doesn't always mean that you're not going to be on the roster. Sometimes it's just the way that they do things. They might do it right before the season starts. We'll see. Obviously, Durant is going to be on the Rockets next year. So I've seen a lot of people say those, the fact that they haven't introduced Simons and introduced Niang indicates that they're going to trade those guys. It might, but I think that there's plenty of examples where they just don't do it at this time of year. This is when it's supposed to get slow, right? There was a lot of movement in June, a lot of teams having conversations. Free agency opens up June 30th. That's, a rapid fire transactions coming in right after that. Things become official July 6th. The draft week on its own, 25th, 26th, that was a really busy time. And now we're entering, there's a couple of holdups with restricted free agents that I think are slowing things down. Al Horford still hasn't signed, but he's all but gone. Jonathan Kuminga is in kind of a tug of war there with the Warriors. I'm sure you could find some reporting on that. ESPN had a story about that earlier today. But yeah, so I don't expect a ton, but they are still just below the second apron, and there might be a little bit more coming in the coming weeks here. J.D. Davison, since we last spoke, has been waived. He signed a 2-way contract with the Houston Rockets. I don't love that fit for him. I would have liked to see him go somewhere where he has the potential to actually sign, to actually get some minutes and to get a little bit of a bigger opportunity. And with Houston, it's like Cam Whitmore couldn't get minutes, and he's going to be on a 2-way. They're going to be a contender. They're a pretty loaded team. So I would have liked to see him go somewhere like Utah or Charlotte, or a team where it's just like there's a little bit less certainty around who's going to be the core rotation. I'm a big J.D. Davison fan. Obviously, he's the franchise leader in Maine for points, assists, and steals, won G League MVP last year. I would have liked to see him stay in Boston, but he was no longer eligible for a 2-way contract in Boston because you can only be on 3 consecutive 2-way contracts with one organization, but you can do it 4 times in total. So he has a 4th year of eligibility. I believe he's the first player in NBA history that has been on 4 2-way contracts. I have to confirm that, but definitely the first to have 3 with one team. So he's kind of a trailblazer in this space. He obviously just doesn't want to go overseas yet. He might end up having to. I've seen a lot of players that were recently NBA rotation players go overseas. Lamar Stevens just signed in Paris. I think O'Shea Brissett, Lonnie Walker. So there's a bunch of guys that are right on the border of making it a not. And all it takes is one team to give you a chance. But if you don't get that team, and in some years, there's just aren't teams that even have the money or those roster spots or those needs, they find themselves going elsewhere. So we'll see kind of what happens next and what happens, with JD, but hoping that he kind of can break through, or at least get a real chance in the NBA, because I don't think he's really gotten one yet. And then the other one is Drew Peterson. Drew Peterson exiting as a 2-way player. He signed with the Charlotte Hornets as a 2-way. I know this is not the stuff that's the most interesting to people, but just wanted to kind of run through all that. Max Shulga officially signs. I like Max Shulga. I think he's a fun player. He was the thing with what was interesting about Summer League is that he didn't do a lot. Like, he averaged 5 points a game. Didn't shoot well at all, but he did have a pretty good assist to turnover ratio, 3.8 assists to 0.8 turnovers per game, which, like, for a rookie guard who is transitioning to Summer League, where it's just kind of an erratic style of play, like, he took really good care of the ball and was kind of a poised playmaker. So we'll see. Great career 3-point shooter, has done a lot on that end. I like his defense for the most part. It's going to come down to whether he can ball hawk at the NBA level. I like the Celtics defense in general with in the Summer League team. So it's hard to know how much that will carry over, but he has officially signed a 2-way contract. And yeah, that is kind of the quick roundup. Before I get into some of the other stuff, I will go through a couple of the questions. Johnny Morris asks, how do we feel about the crisis at center? I saw crisis and I was like, what happened? And then I realized, I know fans are worried about this. I know they're worried about Neemias Queta being one of the centers, or at least the center that the team relies on most. Luka Garza is probably going to get a really substantial run with the team next year as well. And then Amari Williams, he hasn't even signed his 2-way yet, but I presume he'll, with a 2-way contract, for those that don't know, you can play up to 50 games with the parent club. Queta, a couple years back, the year they won the championship, he was like right at that limit, and then they converted him to a standard contract. Outside of that, in recent years, there has not been a player that's brushed up against that line. Like J.D. Davison did not, Drew Peterson did not. Baylor Shireman was not on a 2-way. Jordan Walsh was never on a 2-way. So some of the guys that did spend a lot of time in Maine were never on a 2-way. Amari Williams will presumably be on one. So really, you're talking about Queta and Luka Garza. And I think this is a really serious bet on Queta at center, / also recognition that winning is not the most important thing next year, and being flexible, all these kind of buzzwords that we've heard from Brad Stevens in the front office are of utmost importance. So I don't view it as a crisis, probably because I feel higher on Queta than a lot of you. And that's a fundamental kind of difference between, he's just one of those guys that I've seen enough flashes of that I like his game. I think he can be a double-double in the NBA kind of player. So we'll see. We'll see what happens next. My concern is, like, if he gets hurt, what happens then? You really don't have a lot in the front court. So I would like to see them sign like one more eligible big. I have a story on Charles Bassey coming out at some point this week, hopefully. So I know he's a guy that teams like from Summer League. There's been some reporting that he might be headed overseas. So we'll get into a little bit more about that. And there's a lot of guys that you think they're good fits. And then when you look into it a little bit more, like, there's just there's some reason why teams won't sign them. But I think right now Queta is who they're banking on. And I think he can give you 12 and 12 on a night, on a given night. any given night. So we'll just see whether they're able to kind of capitalize on that momentum. And thank you, Tom. Yeah, I'm going to talk right after I get through these questions about Derrick White's podcast and about a story that I published this morning. Tom asks, what part of the team are you most excited to see next season? I'm excited to see what JB looks like as the number one option over the course of the year. I think for me, I'm really excited to see them play really like a fast pace of basketball that's a little bit less about mismatch hunting. One of the downsides of being such a talented team that this team has been for really as long as I can remember, like not actually, but for many years now, is that you pretty much always have like one-on-one advantages on the floor. So if you have Tatum and Brown and Derrick and Drew and KP on the floor at any given time, which was a common lineup, like it's more about like, hey, let's get KP on a small, let's get, Tatum on a guy that can't guard him, that's too slow. And that's effective offense, but it's just not that fun to watch. Look, right? I want to see Tatum go up against another guy of his caliber, right? I want to see Derrick score on another guard that plays his position. Like, to me, and this is just a personal opinion, and like, I don't know, maybe you guys feel differently, but to me, mismatch hunting is not fun to watch for the most part. So they're not going to have as much mismatches this year. They're just not, because they don't have nearly as much talent as they have in previous years. So in my opinion, I think you're going to see them play a lot faster. I think you're going to see them cut more. Brad Stevens alluded to it on draft night, but this is a team that they were watching, the front office was watching Indiana make this finals run. A team that I think objectively was probably less talented than the Celtics, or definitely less talented than the Celtics. I'm comfortable saying that. But they played a style of offense that it became harder to guard, and that the Knicks couldn't slow down the way they did the Celtics offense. And so that's what I'm kind of looking forward to watching. And Jaylen in particular is a player that I'm excited to watch. Derrick, Payton, those three guys, I think all have the capability to play all-star level basketball. I would not be surprised if any of those guys were all-stars next year. That includes Payton Pritchard, who I think will have an all-star caliber season. This might end up being the worst take you hear. But some of you that are listening to this may know that I thought that Pritchard had all-star potential 2 years ago. So I'm certainly going to bank on that now that he's coming off a 6 Man of the Year campaign with more opportunity, more points, and, minutes and everything to go around than I expected him to have at this point in his career, just because of how everything has happened here. So, so that is that. I've heard people putting Pritchard over Simons to start. I think that Pritchard will start because I think they're going to want to see how he holds up as like one of their lead guards moving forward. Obviously he can thrive in the 6-man role, but at the long term, like, okay, you lost Drew Holiday, you have Derrick White locked up over the next few years. How does a Payton Pritchard, Derrick White backcourt work? Like, I think that's where you're headed, potentially, right? Simons, again, he's making way more money. Simons making next year close to what Pritchard has left on his contract. So over multiple years. So I still don't really see how you keep Simons long term. Just what, I think he's making $28 million next year. So it's on an expiring deal. They might trade him at the deadline. Maybe you just let that expire. I don't know. But Pritchard is a longer term solution. Just contract alone. Forget how you feel about the players. So I would be surprised if they don't try to see how that backcourt works together. Simons, an incredibly talented scorer. Pritchard, better defender at this point in their career. We'll see how Pritchard's his efficiency goes down when he doesn't have the talent around him that he's had over the past couple seasons. He was more efficient than Simons by a lot last year, but it's hard to compare apples to oranges when he had way less of a scoring load and had way more talent and spacing around him. So I don't there's no reason to go back and forth as an argument here, but that's my expectation, is for Pritchard to be the starting guard next year. Maybe not though. Maybe they want to keep him in the 6-man role because he's obviously thrived in that, and they want to see if Simons is somebody that they have more of a long-term role with. So we'll see. G. Martin asks, what's the reason Celtics kicking Horford off the team when they had money for Dame? It's not that they are kicking Horford off the team. I think what they offered, Horford the mid-level, I don't think so. The question with Horford, just as at his age, I think he's 40 now? I won't Google because that will make my computer crash. But I think the question is, was this team going to, is he definitely going to play for 2 more years? I don't know. I think he's definitely going to play for 1 more year, although he hasn't officially signed with any team yet, though all the reporting has indicated that he's likely headed to the Warriors. But if he only has 1 year left, this is just not a very good destination for him because they're not going to be championship contenders next year. So you would imagine that he's looking at teams that could contend. And the reporting, I think Michael Scotto had a list of teams that he was considering shortly after free agency began, and it was like the Lakers, the Cavs, the Knicks, the Warriors, all teams that are in win now mode. You could argue whether or not they're contenders, but they're all in win now mode. And so it's probably a little bit of a mutual decision, that if they're not going to, if he doesn't think he has, 3 years left, they probably don't think that either, just given his age. It's very unusual to play into your 40s. You're looking at now a 1 year deal, and like they're going to offer a 1 year minimum because next year they don't want to up the payroll at all. I think Dame is more of a longer term gamble. And yeah, there's the Achilles injury. But at the same time, he's 32. So there's a substantial difference there as well. So I would have liked to see Al Horford stay around. I wish that he had been more of a priority because I think that there are things that he can bring to this locker room that are unique and that are important, even in a year where you're not trying to contend. But at the same time, I understand how if you're trying to shed salary and if Al can get more elsewhere, he wants a multi-year deal elsewhere and you can't get that in Boston, then that is going to be a place where there's some disconnect in the negotiations. And maybe we'll get more clarity once Al signs somewhere. Maybe he'll share a little bit more on the record of kind of like what the negotiations were like. But my understanding is I don't think it was one side like totally blindsiding the other. I think it kind of was a mutual thing, because if you think about it and you think about where things are headed with this team and where Al is and how little time he has left. And I hate saying that, honestly, because based on his play, he could easily have another couple of years. And we've seen LeBron be effective and an all-NBA player at just 40. So you never want to rule anything out. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Al. Derek asks, after covering the team for at least 2 years now, was there something in your experience as a reporter last year that was better than the year before? Parentheses, banner year is hard to top, I imagine. This is a great question because I love reflecting, but also because I actually enjoyed this past season more than the previous one. And that might surprise people because covering a championship was an incredible experience, such an honor. I don't know if I'll ever get to do it again. I mean, hopefully I will, because I plan on covering this team for the rest of my career, and I would love for that not to be the only championship, and I'm sure you all would love that as well. But in my first year, I still had a full-time job in the political space, which I was working in the food and environmental space in policy. So all of my basketball coverage was not completely unpaid, but like basically, and also I had to juggle like a full-time job in that. So that was hard just from like getting sleep and like being a functioning person standpoint. And then also, I didn't have like really good access. I didn't have sources. I didn't really have relationships with the players. I didn't have locker room access. So I was writing stories. I was like trying my best to like be a good reporter and to, give fans the experience of going behind the scenes and everything. But I didn't have locker room access. So this year I got locker room access. I got a full-time job, and I have actual relationships with a lot of the players and sources and people I talk to around the league. So it's been a lot more fun because I'm a lot better at the job. And I don't know if like fans can tell the difference necessarily, but for me, it's a sizable difference. And it's not something that I could even have imagined my first year. And honestly, having locker room access has given me a lot of insight into the players, their relationships, a lot of things that I didn't have the first year. So that was a massive step up. And before I continue, and that's actually a pretty good segue to the next thing that I was going to talk about, which is Derrick White's podcast. But first, a quick message from our friends over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. PrizePicks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join millions of users and sign up today. On PrizePicks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports, combine your favorite basketball players with players from baseball, hockey, esports, and much more. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports takes into real money all season long on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. So I was just talking about having locker room access and how that was really enhanced my experience as a reporter. And one of the things that I learned when I got locker room access was that Derrick White is actually not quiet and he's not awkward. And it's kind of a funny thing to say, but I think a lot of people, see Derrick White at the podium, and like I know people say he says a lot and he seems kind of reserved and a little bit stiff. That's not his personality. That's just his personality when he's sitting up at the podium with cameras in his face and the knowledge that he doesn't want to say the wrong thing and he doesn't want to get in trouble and he doesn't want to, like they go up to the podium knowing I'm not going to answer questions about this injury. I'm not going to like throw somebody else under the bus, whatever. So to me, I didn't know that about Derrick until I got locker room access and I saw that he was always joking around with everybody. He was like he's probably the loudest guy in the team as far as like who is actually doing the most talking. Kind of reminded me of myself when I was on a basketball team. Like I feel like I was always probably one of the loudest people in the locker room. So it just surprised me. And so he announced on Monday that he's launching a podcast, the White Noise podcast with Derrick White, with his longtime best friend, Alex Welch. And I interviewed Alex and basically got the backstory and like how this came to be. But they were approached by a mutual friend, somebody they really trusted, that was like, you guys are really funny. You guys have been best friends forever. So I think they were college roommates their freshman year of college at UCCS. And basically, this was an opportunity for Celtics fans to get to know Derrick, not like the version of him that they know that's like maybe more reserved and less comfortable seeming, but like just his actual personality. And he's really funny and he's energetic and he's all of these things. So I thought the first episode was really good. Sometimes these player podcasts are not well done, but this is really well done. They clearly know how they're doing it. So you can read my story on just the behind the scenes on Celtics blog. I interviewed kind of his friend and just some of the thinking behind that. And one thing I'll say is I'm a reporter. I love asking questions. At the same time, I was interviewed for a like documentary or something related to the Celtics. And I was asked questions and suddenly I was saying like, I was like saying like more and I was saying more and I started rethinking like what I was saying. And I was like, damn, I'm doing what the players do. Like, I get it. When you're on the record and there's cameras in your face and people are asking you questions, it's really hard to be natural. And like, it's easier for me here when I'm sitting in my room. It's easier for me even when I'm on air, on YouTube, on our show. But when you're being interviewed, like, and you know that they're taking quotes and they're not going to keep everything, you start to think like, am I going to get taken off the record? And I know how it works because I'm in media. So it gave me a little bit more empathy. I mean, I already have a lot of empathy, but it gave me even more context of like how difficult it is for the players to answer questions and worry about like not saying the wrong thing. So in any case, I encourage you guys to check it out. They're not paying me for this promo. I just thought it was a good show and enjoyed learning more about it. So you can check all that out. I'm seeing that some of you guys have already enjoyed watching the pod. Yeah, cool. A lot of people liked it. So, and you can read the backstory on CelticsBlog.com where you can learn a little bit more. It's cool that he's doing it with his best friend. Like I think sometimes you get kind of like a random co-host and his friend has like the media voice. So it was a good match, but they've been best friends. Like they have photos of themselves on draft night. Like they visit each other all the time. They have kids of similar ages. He said he's always hanging out at the White House, which is what they call Derrick White's house. So back to the questions. I appreciate those of you who are here. I recognize a lot of these names now. It's cool to have regular listeners that come back for the show, especially right now when there's not that much news. So I appreciate you all. Johnny asks, when do you think JT will be back? Some analysts have said that he might be back sooner rather than later. This is a good question because obviously it really matters, because if he were slated to come back in January, that changes the trajectory of how you look at next season. First of all, I'll say everybody that has been commenting on this, to my knowledge, is just purely speculating. I have not seen a single ounce of reporting on this. I've only heard that Tatum's dad said 8 to 9 months, which would have put him back like around the All-Star break. I don't know that Tatum's dad is a source that, Mark Spears, I think, had that report right after the injury happened. I don't think you can know at all what the timeline is going to be that early on. Did see that Tatum was walking around St. Louis. He had a pretty busy week with philanthropic events, with basketball games, with all of that. So I saw that he was not wearing a boot in most of the videos, and some he was. I think it's something to go back and forth. The reason I don't think he'll be back, most likely, but I'm not ruling anything out, is just because this roster, like if they were trying to maximize winning next year, and maybe they are, and I don't want to discredit it too much because I still think this team is going to be a playoff team, and I still think people are going to be surprised because I believe in a lot of the guys in the roster, but I don't think the offseason priority was like, we're going to try to win a championship next year and we're going to bring everybody back that we can, and Tatum's most likely going to be back in January. Like all the indications that I get is that they're assuming that he won't be back. And obviously if he's ready to come back, nobody's going to stop him. I mean, maybe they'll try, but if he's cleared and he's good to go and it's, February and he wants to get a couple months in before the offseason, like I think he will. From what I understand, he's on schedule. He's having a great recovery. Brad Stevens has spoken highly of it. We see photos of him working out. I know he's worked out in multiple schools, Tennessee, St. Louis, and the fact that he's out of a boot, good news. The other thing is that I reported this soon after the injury, but he was really the first NBA player to have that surgery within 12 hours. Like usually it takes a couple of days to get that scheduled, but he happened to be in the city where you do that procedure I think it's the HSS hospital in New York. He was in New York because it was a Knicks game. The surgeon was available. He did it right away. That helps with your outlook as well. So that's reason for optimism. But right now, I'm still going to guess that they are not going to see Tatum on the team next year. I would love to see him back because I hate seeing guys be injured. And I think even if I know people are like, oh, he shouldn't rush back. He's not going to rush back. Like he'll come back when it's appropriate. He has a medical team. He's a smart guy. He has no history of doing anything erratic. So I think when they clear him and when he's on the injury report, it's questionable. I know people are going to freak out if it's next year. Like I will have faith that's the right decision. If he's there, they're not going to rush him though. And I think Damian Lillard, from what I understand, they're not planning on him playing next year. Tyrese Halliburton, who suffered the injury about a month after, has already been ruled out of next year. So I think the general consensus is that if a guy suffers a playoff Achilles tear, they're going to miss the following season unless some miracle, he's way ahead of schedule. So we'll see, but that's my current understanding. And how many games do we think we can win without Jayson Tatum? Yosef asks. It's really so. If it was just no Jayson Tatum, I would have said I think they can be a 50-something win team. And I have to probably think a little bit harder about that. But that's like where my head was at. I was viewing this team as like uber competitive. The problem is that you lost Tatum, Porzingis, Holiday, Luke, and Al. That's the concern. Not that Tatum alone is not a massive concern. Obviously, he's the biggest loss of those guys by a lot, but you lost half of your rotation. So, how many games do you win without that whole group? I think this is going to be I'm guessing this is going to be around a 500 team next year, which is probably a lot of fans' worst case scenarios because that doesn't put you enough for a lottery spot, but also you're not going to be competitive. You're probably going to be a play-in team. I think that's where they're going to end up because they just have a lot of good players on this roster still. Like Anthony Simons is a guy that is not going to help, is going to help you win some games. You still have three guys that I think are bucket getters: Derrick, Peyton, and Jaylen. A lot of it's going to come down to the front court. Can Nimi stay healthy? Can Nimi be impactful? But I think you probably were going to lose like 10 games just from Tatum, and you're probably losing another 10 or even more for the rest of those guys. So we'll see. Miguel asks, do you think if Joe had used Tatum more in the playoff, they would have eliminated the Knicks since KP's struggles were very evident early on? I don't know, because I don't know how Tatum would have done, like being thrown in there after really not playing a lot. I think it's a tough spot for most guys to thrive when they have basically not been in the rotation for months. Tatum never really got consistent rhythm, so I have no reason to believe that Tatum would have been the answer. And if he's great next year, he still might not have been the answer last year because last year was a different year. And this offseason, he's prepping with the knowledge that he's going to have a big role to play. If he plays well, like that starting spot's his. So I wish he would have played Luke more because Luke was in the rotation and Luke clearly was ready for the moment when it came. But I don't view KP struggles as like the single thing that made this team lose. Like the Knicks defense was different than it was during the season. Tatum and Brown both struggled. Tatum obviously had that really big game the night that he got hurt, but both of them were less efficient than their usual selves. And so it's not one thing, but I think less Porzingis would have certainly upped their chances regardless of who you subbed in there because it was so hard to watch as somebody that like really enjoys covering him and like really enjoyed how good he was when he came back from his illness right away and from everything. Like he was always so good when he came back from extended absences. To see him struggle the way that he did was hard to watch. And honestly, for me, like that was what I think that they took them a little too long to recognize that he was not providing any value really for this team. So we'll see. We'll see what Kato looks like next year, but it's hard to know. Yosef asks, do you think JB is going to get traded? I don't. I think that that part of the offseason has passed, and I don't expect him to go anywhere. At the same time, there's going to be some in-season moves. Like I think maybe a couple of the guys are going to be vulnerable. I still think that you want to keep Tatum and Brown both long term, and so I was happy to see that they're not going to have like that be broken up this summer, a year after he wins Finals MVP, a year after the championship and everything. So. Josh asks, off topic, no, but how do you feel about the WNBA Finals rematch tonight? I'm super excited. I love watching the Lynx play. I think they're one of the most fun teams to play. I loved covering the finals last year, WNBA Finals. I don't know how many of you are locked in, but it is Lynx versus Liberty. Liberty, I've been so injury ridden, so I we'll see what happens there. Kind of reminds me of the Celtics campaign. Like, it's really hard to repeat because now you have those extra miles on your legs, and you're getting older, your core, all those things. So I'm seeing some signs of some Celtics second year. Hopefully there are no serious injuries though. Let's see what else here. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of chat. What do you think Al will do? I think Al is going to go to the Warriors. That's just been all the reporting. So I haven't been talking to too many people. Once it became clear he wasn't coming back to Boston, that's somebody else's story. You think Gonzalez will make the team or spend most of the year in Maine? I think that he will there will be opportunities for him in Boston. I don't think they're just going to move him to Maine and just relegate him there and not give him a chance. I saw Keith Smith of Spot Track, like, he had reported that he had like an on background quote from a coach that said that Ugo will get opportunities in Boston. So that I use that as an indication, like, I don't know which coach it was, but one of the Celtics assistant coaches said that, to Keith. So that that game, I haven't heard that directly, but I thought from watching him in Summer League, he looked pretty raw. Like, there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. And Baylor, who came in a couple years older, was the 30th pick, but a couple years older, still spent half the year in Maine. So I think Ugo will probably spend half the year in Maine and come down the second half of the year. That being said, like, if Jordan and Baylor are both playing terrible and they want to roll the dice a little and see if Ugo's ready, like, maybe he'll get more of an opportunity. But I think those two guys are ahead of him right now, and I expect him to surpass them down the road, or at least that's the projection with, picking him at 28th. So we'll see. Yosef asks, do you think JB could get better on the three-point line? He's coming off of, I think, his worst three-point shooting season of his career. And he's had a couple of worse seasons. Always, there's always opportunities for guys to become better shooters. A lot of it is about shot selection. A lot of it is about form. A lot of it is about confidence and how you're guarded. My thing, though, is that Jaylen should not be a high-volume three-point shooter because there's things that he can do more effectively driving to the basket. I think people are going to remember how explosive he is. Even just I watched some of his warm-up clips. Like, he was working out in Malaga, Spain, where there's some NBPA stuff there, but he's he's like a month and a half post-surgery. He already looked better than he looked at times during the season. So I think that you're going to see how explosive he is, and that's something that fans maybe forgot a little bit just because of how inhibited he was towards the end of the season there. But yes, I think that he's absolutely capable of a better shooting year. A lot of guys, when you look at, like, their shot with Tatum, right? Like, he was a better shooter earlier in his career. What's the explanation for that? It's a mix of so many variables that I try not to be a shot doctor, and I try not to say, like, okay, this is the reason for sure. But certainly a part of it is mental, because once you start to doubt your shot, I know you've had so many 2 for 11 shooting nights, like, there's that as well. Some of it is taking bad shots. I think with Tatum and Brown, they both have had a tendency at points to revert to taking worse shots than they need to. There's a better shot available. So we'll see. And I think Jaylen's still going to play with a lot of guys that are better three-point shooters than him, between Pritchard, White, Hauser, and Yang, who's also like a basically career 40% three-point shooter. So it's a lot of guys that he's going to want to defer to. So I don't think you're going to see him be like a high-volume shooter, but certainly it's always possible to get a little bit better. Freddie asks, if they do value the draft more than wins this year, could Baylor and Walsh both spend time in Maine? I don't think that Walsh is going to spend time in Maine. It's going to be his third season with the Celtics. If that's where he's at in his development, they're just going to cut him. I think only $200,000 and his contract is guaranteed. So if that's how they feel about Jordan, I don't think that he's going to go to Maine. He played one regular season game in Maine last year, so that would be a big step back for him. And he had coming off a good summer league. He's getting older. His shot looks better. He feels more confident. So don't expect that. Honestly, same thing with Baylor. Baylor spent half the year in Maine, came up to Boston, was ready to contribute to NBA minutes. So I don't think either of those guys are going to be in Maine. If that's the case, something has probably gone not great in their development. They're not going to tank in that fashion, right? Like, you might see if they're like trying to now maximize winning, it's not going to be like, oh, Jordan Walsh is helping us to win too much in Boston. It's going to be, we're going to rest, Jaylen Brown, Derrick White, because those guys have a lot of miles in their legs, especially in recent years, and next year is really the year that matters. So we'll see. Certainly, yes, the West will be better than the East next year. Seems to always be the case, but it seems stronger than ever, especially when you think about the fact that, the Bucks, the Celtics, and the Pacers all lost their all-star point guard to Achilles tears, and then Milwaukee later on as well. So we'll see. As always, really appreciate you all for tuning in. We're going to keep doing these every week. Some weeks there'll be more to talk about than other weeks. We'll talk a little bit more about where the Celtics fall within other teams as well. Just wanted to remind you all, it's the offseason, but CLNS always still has content. So I know Bobby went live with the Garden Report yesterday and discussed kind of the standings. If you want to get some of that content, I think he went on live with Law Murray of The Athletic. We have all of our podcasts still running, the Big Three podcast, my podcast, You Got Boston. Subscribe to that. If you're watching this, that's what this is. And also, like, any content, any players, if we have interviews, all of that will be on there. You can check out past episodes as well. So check out all of our content at CLNS Media and at CLNS All Access, as always. Pretty much if a player has been interviewed and there's media, like, we try to get it for you guys all to be able to watch, as always. And I see there's a few last questions here. I will say, Phil Pressey, I'm really excited to see him coach the Maine Celtics. I haven't been able to roll out my feature on him yet. You can check out my feature on the Summer League head coach, Matt Reynolds, on Celtics blog. I also did a podcast episode on that. But Phil Pressey was drafted for the Celtics, played a game with the Maine Celtics, and he'll be a coach. So it's going to be super cool. They will be a completely different team because JD Davison has been the fixture there. But I know for those of you that follow Maine, that's always another fun team to follow. You can check out. I'm going to try to be on top of reporting and breaking which players are signing with the Maine Celtics. So follow along on all that coverage. With that, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you all, as always, for tuning in, and we'll be back soon.